Welcome to yet another episode of Shortcast Over Coffee. My guest today is the current mayor of the city of Carmel, Indiana, Jim Brainard. Jim has served as the mayor of Carmel, Indiana since 1996. First elected in 1995, Jim is currently in his seventh term as the mayor of this fast growing, affluent city just north of Indianapolis. Under Jim's leadership, Carmel has transformed from a sleepy Midwestern town to a thriving hub of economic development and population growth. Jim has championed massive infrastructure projects, including the building of roundabouts, trails, and other amenities that have helped attract corporate headquarters and new residents. In this episode, we talk about the initiatives Jim took as the mayor for the city of Carmel, including green spaces, getting rid of traffic lights, and making it one of the most walkable cities in the US. The ad revenue from this episode will go to the Ocean Cleanup Initiative. Please visit www.theoceancleanup.com to know more. It's www.theoceancleanup.com. Let's now get into the episode. Welcome, Jim, to the podcast.
Well, it's great to be with you today. How are you?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm very good. It's gotten cold in Indiana the last day or two. Last week it was in the 90s Fahrenheit or 30 Celsius, and today it's 25 degrees cooler.
Oh, wow. I hear that you're working remote today.
I am. I get a lot done from my house, and started during the pandemic, of course, like many people, and I find I don't get interrupted as much.
That's awesome. Jim, I was researching about you, and what I find incredible is you first became the mayor. You became the mayor for the first time in 1996. Carmel, Indiana might have been a really small town in 1996. And it's your seventh consecutive term. And you are one of the most longest serving mayors in the US. So congratulations for that. What has changed between 1996 and 2023, not just from a population standpoint, but in general in the city of Carmel, Indiana?
Well, of course, the population did change. It's quadrupled, from roughly 25,000 to over 100,000. But I think more interestingly is how the city grew during that period of time, because we made the decision, after being spurred on by our electorate, to build something besides the traditional sprawling suburb. So many places look like the big box retail parking lot. I joke when I talk with anybody, go for a romantic walk past the Walmart parking lot this week. But what I'm trying to suggest is that we can build our cities so they're much more beautiful. They're more focused on the pedestrian, not vehicles. We still have to accommodate the vehicles. But since World War II, we have built most of our cities in the United States, our new cities, for cars, not for people. And so we started to investigate why that was and what the legal and financial hurdles were to building a beautiful traditional city. And I think we figured that out. So unlike most US suburbs of major cities, we're on the edge of Indianapolis. It's a 2 million metro area. We share a street with Indianapolis, but our suburb is our edge city, I like to say, is very different because we have a walkable downtown. We're something more than just a string of subdivisions with a good public school system and a good library. We have a lot of mixed use buildings in our downtown area. We have relegated most of the car parking or car storage, as I like to call it, underground or the garages. And then when we build an above ground garage, we usually face it with interesting buildings so it looks better to the pedestrian. You know, it's just not about being able to go out for a walk. It's about going out for an interesting walk. And walking past 100 houses that all look like the next one, that's not interesting. And then turning around and going back, because you really can't walk in many of our suburbs to places that one needs to go. Same with a big parking structure above ground. It doesn't become more walkable if you walk past a block of blank building with cars in it. So it's important to line those buildings with shops or houses with entrance. The parking can be then and back in that garage. So we've built our city, and we've focused on things, I think, that build civic wealth for the entire community. Places for people from different backgrounds to come together and get to know each other and find out what they have in common. That's very important to our representative government, I think, particularly in that country is made up of people from all over the world with different faiths, different races, different places of origin. And cities have always served the function of bringing people together. But yet, the last 70 years in the United States, we've designed our cities without much thought about where all these different groups of people will have opportunities to meet each other, assimilate, and get to know each other. And that's an important thing that cities do for their residents as well.
Yeah, I think you say a very important point that a walk isn't enough. The walk has to be very, very interesting. That makes that walk so much better. And I'm just curious to know what you were doing before running for the mayor of the city of Carmel.
I grew up in a small town in northern Indiana, matriculated at Butler University when I was 18, was graduated with a degree in history and communication, and then went to law school and became a lawyer. And so for the 14 years prior to becoming mayor, I practiced law.
Okay,
I also had
fantastic.
an interest in architecture, and why some cities were nice places and others weren't, and a serious interest in architecture. Middle school, we always write that essay where we have to talk about 3 professions we might like. Architecture is one of mine. So even though I didn't become an architect, I now get to work with lots of architects as we build our new city.
Yeah, and I believe that is also a part of sort of beautification of downtown and mixed use spaces that you were mentioning earlier, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's there's an economic development reason for building beautiful cities as well. We're on a flat plain with lousy weather, no mountains, no oceans, not even a river through the middle of downtown. And we've got to be able to compete for the best and brightest from the greatest universities in the world. And to the extent that those people that our 150 some corporate headquarters need to succeed don't want to spend their lives here, don't want to raise their families in our community, those companies will eventually go elsewhere, and they certainly won't expand here. So it's tremendously important that it's a good enough place, in fact, a great place to raise a family, spend your life. We only get, a few choices when we decide where we're going to live. And so I joke, sometimes I show a picture of San Diego from Coronado Island, and those of you that know about it, you know what I'm talking about, but it's palm trees, a mountain range. We know it's 20 degrees Celsius because it's always 20 degrees Celsius or 72 Fahrenheit, whatever it's perfect temperature, and there's blue waves and sailboats and just gorgeous. And I say, this isn't Carmel. And then I pop up a picture of Northern California, the beaches, probably up by Mendocino, and say this isn't Carmel either. And then I show a picture of Aspen Mountain in Colorado at twilight and say this isn't Carmel. Then I show this picture of a flat soybean field and say this is our palette. Then I pop up a picture of the Eiffel Tower at twilight and say they had the same palette we did. Lousy weather, no mountains and no oceans, and they built a beautiful city. We can do this as well. Trying to get people to think bigger, to think outside, understand that our competition is across the globe, just not locally. And plus, it's just the right thing to do for the people that have chosen to live here. Why not have a beautiful city? As we're growing this quickly, we have choices. And we set very high standards. Some of the developers complained they didn't like our standards and left, but we attracted far more really good developers that wanted to be part of a quality place and build quality buildings So it's worked out very well for us.
Yeah, I think some cities are just, or some states are just blessed with so much natural goodness in terms of weather and beauty. You took the example of Coronado Island. I used to live in San Diego, and I've been to Coronado many, many times. It is gorgeous, but then it's important to do the best with what you have, and I think that's where your significance is much above a lot of other mayors. One of the things that I wanted to ask was, you become the mayor in 1996. Did you start making this radical shift right from day one, or did you get inspired from your own childhood? Because I'm pretty sure American cities were a lot different back in those days. Or did you take inspiration from some of the cities in Europe? What made you change?
All of the above. I had been fortunate to travel to Europe. I remembered beautiful walkable cities from when I was a boy, before we had as many cars as we do today and had as much urban sprawl as we do today. And, I listened to the public, and they were yearning for a traditional city. They talked about being able to walk places they needed to go, about being able to walk out to a restaurant and see a show, and not be tied to their car and not be in their car for hours and hours. So, city planners had their big victory about 1890, 1900. They figured out that if we had single-use zoning where all the factories were over on this side of town and all the housing was on the other side of the town, people would live an extra 20 years or so. And it was a great move forward for our civilization. However, we continued to do that and do it and do it. But, as the industry became much cleaner, we still did it. We did it because it's just the way we had done things for so long. But we've created a system where you can't walk anywhere you need to go. We know that obesity rates go down by 35% if people just walk 10 minutes to and from work. We know that overweight rates, the next category, go down by a similar amount, about 30%, if you walk 10 minutes to and from work every day. We know that urban sprawl from a mental health standpoint is unhealthy because we're social animals and we need social interaction. We saw this particularly in the 1950s when most families in the United States only had one car. And the husband then generally would leave with a car in the morning to go to work, and his spouse, the wife, would be almost trapped in her house. The neighbors were sometimes quite a ways away. And generally, these folks had moved from places, traditional city blocks. They had lots of activity. They walked to the market. They walked to the park. Suddenly, they were very isolated in the mental health rates. There's a famous book and then later a movie called Valley of the Dolls about women in these situations starting to use drugs because of the social isolation they were thrown into, because of bad city design, quite honestly. You look at some pictures of our cities back in the 1920s and 1910s, they were beautiful. And you saw people everywhere. Today, you look at our city, what do you generally see? An 8-lane highway and exit ramps. We also know that we don't want to build too high. There's a lot of research about mental health. The Japanese even have a word for it, committing suicide outside of tall buildings. Once you get over about 6 or 7 stories and can no longer have a connection with street life, suicide and mental health rates go way up as well.
Yeah, I mean,
the way we built Western Europe and other places, up to the invention of structural steel in the 1880s, 90s was probably right. We, there's a lot of experimentation, but actually that was about right. It's what we found from the data that we've acquired over the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah, I think in Europe, most cities don't have. Apart from the downtown areas or whatever, they probably don't have anything above 12 floors. And if you go to like the 25th or the 47th floor in a skyscraper, you're sort of cut off from reality. I think you make a very interesting point there. So the population growth of Carmel, Indiana, was it driven by people wanting to move more to the suburbs from Indianapolis, or did it have something to do with the zoning laws or redlining?
Well, I think 2 things were going on. People were moving from Indianapolis. but a lot of people were moving from out of state as well as our reputation grew. We built 250 miles of bike trails. That's one thing you can do when you're flat, is it's easy to bike. And so we did a lot of that. We have a great public school system and library. We focused on public art, making the city beautiful, making our road system, roundabouts are just one part of it, but far safer and easier to get places in a car if you choose to drive. So it's a very safe city. All these things, I do run into people every week or two. It seems like that, well, I was online, I can work remotely. I went online to look for the best places to live in the US and saw Carmel's name. And we knew somebody, or we thought we'd go check it out. And it's amazing how people will find you that otherwise wouldn't have because of good marketing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. I was looking up the same statistics that you were mentioning, and Carmel has consistently ranked high up there in terms of, best city to live in, best city to raise your kids, best city to raise your family. So that's fantastic. And just for the listeners, the green space in Carmel, Indiana, has risen from 40 to 800 acres under Jim. So that is quite fantastic. I also remember watching some of the videos from the 1940s or pre-World War era of some of our cities, and it's fascinating how close communities were, and every city had so many streetcars. I just wanted to ask you, when you were working on this city planning or public policy for Carmel, was streetcars ever in your thought that we need to bring back our streetcars?
Yes, they are, whether it's a streetcar or a tram, but what I call intra-city public transit. It could even be buses. I like streetcars like you. The developers like it too, because they know when those rails are in the ground, those stops won't move as easily if it's a bus stop. And so they're more willing to invest money around those stops. But we need to get to a certain density before we know that works. Well, I think we're almost there in Carmel. We've been studying it. We have routes. We've been working with a consultant from San Jose, California, that has some expertise in transit. And I think the city, I won't be mayor after the conclusion of this calendar year, but we'll have those plans in place. And I hope the next administration takes them forward, because I think we have enough density in our downtown area now. Over the holiday season in December, with the Christmas and Hanukkah season, we have a big Christmas market, and thousands of people coming, 450,000 people over a 6-week period. And so we have been experimenting with, we've rented some old-fashioned lane trolleys that are on rubber wheels. They're really buses that look like trolleys, and it's just been moving people around from the area where the market's held to our restaurants in the downtown areas. It's cold that time of year, and these vehicles are often filled with people. So I think there is demand for it, and I believe it will work well in our downtown area.
Yeah, that is fantastic. I have had similar experience in Laguna Beach, where you just park your car and there is a free trolley service that takes you wherever you want. You can literally get down at the spot of your interest and enjoy the beautiful weather. That's fantastic. And I think one of the problems with streetcars, like you mentioned, is you need to have a certain density before which a particular station would cater to X amount of people. And I think LA is facing something similar, where they have light rail, but at the same time, light rail stops are right in the middle of highways. So getting to the station is a problem, and that is affecting ridership quite a bit.
But planners call the last mile.
Yeah.
How do you get to the station? And again, so much of both LA and Indianapolis and cities throughout the country are not built to be walkable. Many times streets don't have sidewalks, and the houses are so far apart, you have to walk past an awful lot of houses to get someplace you want to go. The stores, for instance, a grocery store, I'm told, requires 7,000 families to be profitable. And so are those 7,000 families coming from a 20-mile area or a 2-mile area? And think of all the extra cars on the road if they're coming from a 20-mile circle around that store. That's why urban sprawl also contributes so much to traffic congestion. people are having to drive long distances for short, easy errands, which if they lived in a denser mixed use area, they could walk to.
Yeah,
There's a convenience store downstairs across the block. You run down the stairs, walk across the street, get what you need, and go back. Or you drive 10 to 12 miles or even 5 miles. But you think about that, then cumulatively with thousands and thousands of people, one reason we have so much road congestion, bad city planning.
yeah, yeah. Cannot agree more. So, I'll come to the roundabouts in a bit, but when you were thinking of redesigning Carmel as a city, how much burden was it from a taxpayer standpoint, and how much of what percentage of budget was taken to remodel a city like Carmel? Because from what I understand, Carmel still has one of the lowest tax rates in cities across America. So how did you manage all that?
We used debt. We used it hopefully intelligently. One device we use to get the cars underground. Underground parking is very expensive. About $80,000 US a space. Even parking in a garage, depending on whether it's precast or cast in place concrete, can be 40,000 a space. So that's expensive. 10 spaces above ground, 40,000 below ground, 800,000. But what we did, let me give an example. We have one 9-acre site now that we're about to enter into a public partnership. Our redevelopment commission purchased it a few years ago. We've been planning it. 9 acres is a big piece of land in a city, but 85% of it was an asphalt parking lot, and about 15% was a one-story 1950-ish retail shopping center in a U-shaped, horseshoe shape. And so we tore those buildings down. We were getting $60,000 a year in property tax because parking lots don't pay much. We'll now get $3 million a year. Think about that, 60,000 to 3 million. So we'll take, let's say, 2.4 million of that anticipated revenue under Indiana law for up to 25 years and borrow against that anticipated revenue and use it to put the cars underground. And then we're allowed to build at the density that'll get us to 3 million, but no higher than 5-6 stories.
While keeping the taxes low.
So, this pays for itself, in essence, is what I'm explaining. So I had to get that loan of tens of millions of dollars. We didn't have to burden the taxpayer. And in fact, we don't even sign on those loans generally anymore. The developer who's building the building, who's getting the benefit of that underground parking, signs on the loans. So the taxpayers aren't at risk.
Yeah, this far-sightedness is what is required of a mayor. And coming to
tax incremental finance, the acronym is TIF, TIF.
okay.
And most states have it. California used to have it. Governor Brown made some changes to it, but not sure it's quite as readily available in California today.
Okay. So yeah, talking about farsightedness, it was 1996 and the population, like you mentioned, was 25,000. What made you decide that we need to get rid of traffic lights as much as possible? You can explain it through statistics, but 25,000 is not when people usually take an action. They take it when it's high time. But explain me the thought process behind roundabouts.
Well, I was fortunate because as I said earlier, I was a historian and a lawyer. I knew nothing about civil engineering. So I asked lots of questions about why we did things the way we were doing them. And many times I got the answer from the civil engineers, the consulting engineers, I don't know, that's just the way we do it. And I said, well, would you be open to different ways of doing it that might work better? When I was in graduate school, I had spent some time in England and I saw the roundabouts there. And these are what you call modern roundabouts. They were invented by two British engineers in the early 1960s. And counterintuitively, the smaller the circle, the safer it becomes because of speed. It's all about speed. And so there's a lot of confusion about those roundabouts versus the rotaries in New England. Sometimes the mid-Atlantic states are called traffic circles, but they're bigger, they're multi-lane, people go faster in them. I joked, well, have you ever sped up to go through a green light or a yellow light in your life?
No.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course not. Nobody's ever done that, right? We've all done it. But then we know the human error rate is, let's say it's 1 every 50,000 cars is going to be an accident. That doesn't seem like that much. Until you start to think about it, wait a minute, there's 25,000 cars a day through that intersection. That means we're going to have an accident every 2 days. Or even there's 10,000 cars a day, we're going to have one every 5 days. So then the next question is, what type of accident is it going to be? Is it going to be a minor slow speed accident, or is it going to be a high speed crash where people just floored it to get through that yellow light? And that's when we have fatalities. The US fatality rate per 100,000 people is 12 people a year per 100,000. Indianapolis was 15 last year. Other cities, Indiana's high as 30 per 100,000. We're 1/6 the national average of 12. We're just over 2 fatalities per year. We've never, I don't think we've ever had a 2-car fatality in a roundabout in Carmel out of our 150 some roundabouts. We've have had single car fatalities in our roundabouts. Usually get 1 or 2 a year, and not almost every time alcohol and drugs have been involved. We had one about 1.5 years ago. The street was marked 35 miles per hour, and the police estimated the driver was going over 120 when he hit a fountain in the middle of the roundabout, flipped his car, and killed himself. And then he was tested. It was about 6 a.m. on a Saturday morning. He was tested. And he was 0.03 for blood alcohol level, and he had methamphetamines in his system. He had meth. So, good traffic design can't fix that sort of abuse. But we can design a much safer system for sober people. We know there's bad drivers out there. We also know there's impaired drivers, so you do what you can. But the roundabouts are so much safer. They're better for older drivers because of more response time at slower speeds. They're better for younger drivers because of more response time. They're better for the blind and disabled because cars are going so much slower. Sometimes advocates for the blind will say to me, well, they can't hear that audible signal. It says it's okay to go across the crosswalk. And I said, that's misleading. What if somebody blows through that? The sun's in their eyes, or they're texting and don't stop? It's going to be a high-speed accident. The roundabouts are hard enough to navigate. Everyone knows you have to put down your phone and pay attention. So our data shows that the disabled and the blind and children are actually safer in roundabout pedestrian crossings without a dedicated pedestrian signal than they are at a stoplight crossing.
Yeah. And a lot of the accidents are caused when someone is taking a left turn, and with a roundabout, you're completely eliminating the left turn, right?
Yes. Well, there's also 32 potential conflict points at a signalized intersection with all left turn motions and right turns. Roundabout only has 8 potential conflict points.
Okay. So what percentage
4
of the
lanes in and out, basically. That's so there's 4 streets coming into a roundabout, and then there's 4 headed out, basically, and those are the contact points in and out.
Yeah. So what percentage of roundabouts in Carmel are single lane versus multi-lane? Because the reason why I'm asking this question is multi-lane can make it a little more complicated, increase speeds, but the roundabout size will be much larger. But how do you sort of compare single lane versus multi-lane in Carmel?
Well, we look at traffic fine. And so occasionally we do have to go to 2 lanes. Most of our roundabouts are single lane, but certainly not all. You can also do what's called a slip lane, which means you never enter the roundabout for a right turn. You can do that on all 4 corners if you want to, or only maybe 2 corners if we have, morning commute and evening commute going in one direction. Roundabouts work best if you've got more or less equal traffic from every entrance. When it's all coming from one way, they don't do as well. but having those slip lanes helps capacity by about 12% each time one puts one in. So yeah, we passed an ordinance that you can't overtake a truck or a bus that's in the roundabout because sometimes they take up 2 lanes. The pedestrian crosswalk is about 1 car length back from the yield bar. And then there's a place of refuge in the middle. It's actually an island that directs the cars which direction to go and which angle. But that's a place of refuge for the pedestrian as they walk across as well.
Yeah, when you brought about this change from traffic light to roundabout, was there any pushback? It's highly unlikely because of clear advantage of a roundabout. But from a driver's perspective, they were so used to traffic lights and they kind of knew what to do. And even though the DMV manual says what needs to be done at a roundabout, uh, because of lack of roundabouts, people are just not used to it. So was there a learning curve among the residents of Carmel?
Absolutely, there was. We did a lot of public education in our city newsletter and cable TV channel. We Evergreen, what the reporters call evergreen articles. They go on vacation. They need to still have something in the newspaper, so they would write these articles in advance. And articles that aren't timely are called evergreen articles, and so could always have a roundabout safety article. And so we would lay those out for the reporters and try to get as much free publicity as we could as well about how to drive through roundabouts. The RBMV put a couple pages in our local driver's manual. And that's helped a great deal, I think, all those things.
I wanted to get into the cost aspect of it. I read that traffic lights actually cost a lot. I mean, the numbers were quite startling. So, how much of a benefit cost-wise did you get when you took away traffic lights and brought about roundabouts?
Well, there's a tremendous cost advantage over time. If I'm converting a 4-way stop or 2-way stop intersection to a roundabout versus a stoplight, the roundabout's always going to be $500,000 less. Taking out a stoplight and putting in a roundabout is expensive, usually $1.5 to $2 million. A stoplight in our part of the country is about $400,000 to install. In a hurricane-prone area, which I guess would include Southern California now, it would be $800,000 to install. And then you have about $10,000 to $12,000 electricity a year to power that light. You have to send a timing engineer to adjust it every so often. And you have to send a police officer there. If there's an electrical storm, the electricity goes out, he or she will be there to direct traffic. And none of those things have to take place or roundabout. That buys a lot of nice public art and flowers and landscaping for the middle of that roundabout. But the big savings or roundabouts are, each one's a bit different because there's underground utilities, there's land acquisition costs for both stoplights and roundabouts. And so everything I say, take it as a general statement because land may be expensive one place and not in another. There may be different types of underground utilities that have to be paid to be moved depending on the law of the individual state or jurisdiction, and just what's underground. You don't know, every intersection is different. But here are the big savings. So many times a civil engineer, city engineer gets a call saying from a city council member or mayor, city manager, constituent, says, you've got to do something. Congestion on this street is just terrible. And so the go-to answer usually is to add lanes, not, in other words, increasing intersection capacity, not lane capacity. I said that backwards. Increasing lane capacity, not intersection capacity. All we're really doing is building a bigger parking lot to get more cars through the green cycle of the light. And of course, we're adding to the heat island effect that you get on roads. Roads are very expensive themselves. A 2-lane road from scratch in this part of the country costs about $12 million a mile. So adding those lanes is very expensive. And so that's a very subtle savings because roundabouts move 50, and this is the key, they move 50% more cars per hour than a traffic light. So we don't have to widen the streets as much to relieve traffic congestion. And it's millions and millions of dollars can be saved with roundabouts because we don't have to widen the lanes. We even had one street through the middle of town. It was a 5-lane street, 2 lanes in each direction with a center, what we call a suicide lane, left-hand turn lane. We actually took out that left-hand turn lane, put a median down the middle of it, took out all the traffic lights, put roundabouts in, went from 2 lanes in each direction to 1 lane in each direction, added a bike lane, widened the sidewalk on the other side for pedestrians. And guess what? The time of travel from point A to point B on that street hasn't changed. Speeds have gone down, but we got rid of the wait time at the traffic lights. And that is the second big savings that is often overlooked. And that's the cost of the gasoline to the public. So we know that cars burn so much gasoline on average sitting at lights. Some go straight through, but we know percentage don't. So you can take that percentage, you average the idle time and starting that big heavy vehicle from 0. Sometimes you have to stop at a roundabout, but not usually. Rush hour you might have to for a little while. So these are all averages and generalizations, but they make the point. It's so dramatic. States have different gasoline prices, but we figured, I think, at $3 a gallon a couple years ago. The cost of the roundabout at $2 million was paid for in gas savings by the public in 18 months. It's bottom line.
That is an
That also
incredible
translates
statistic.
to being better for the environment. But you think about, okay, how many people go through that roundabout every day? What's the average wait time at a stoplight versus a roundabout? How much fuel is consumed by that one person? Then just multiply it by your traffic count, and suddenly it's a very big number. And so even though the city pays the roundabouts, the taxpayers are all saving a lot of gas, and cumulatively that adds up.
That is an incredible statistic. I think two things have to be noted here. One is the $800K to install a traffic light, and such high fuel cost savings. I think that's an unbelievable. How many traffic lights does Carmel have now?
6. And we're to keep 1. We have the other 5 are all coming out. They've been funded. It will take place over the next 2 years. We have about 150 roundabouts today.
I can count 6 traffic lights in like the 4 blocks of the cityscape that I'm living in. That's amazing. And the other thing that I've noted is that bike lanes versus cars in traffic lights. This is something that I have noticed is within a 5-mile range, biking and driving is about the same time. So the amount of time you spend at a traffic light is significantly higher versus if you were to take a bike trail. Even though, like you mentioned, the average speeds are much lesser, but at the same time, you get to your destination about the same time as a car.
We have a lot of cyclists that use our roundabouts. They can either ride through the roundabout at 15 to 20 miles an hour, which is the recommended speed for a vehicle, whether it's a bike or a car, or they can walk it across on the pedestrian side. We have bike paths along all our major arterial roads in Carmel, 12-foot wide bike paths. And the crosswalk's always 1 car length back at a roundabout from the yield bar. And there's an island of refuge in the middle, so the walker or pedestrian can wait in the middle and only have to look in one direction each time. But bicyclists, especially kids and younger people or older people, may choose not to ride in the roundabout with the cars, but ride on the side paths as well above the curb. That's where I ride most of the time. Occasionally I ride through the roundabout, but generally I stay in the pedestrian area.
Yeah, sometimes reduced speeds, not sometimes, I think all the time, reduced speeds cause less bike accidents, and reduced speeds cause less pedestrian accidents as well. According to statistics.
Of course.
Yeah. Did you have any pushback from traffic light companies because you were making this change, and how did you navigate through that?
Actually, we have a local company that makes stoplights, and the owner is a good guy. He came to me a number of years, 20 years ago probably, and so we'd like to donate a light. Of course, we had a lot more lights then, but he donated one for the main corner, the corner that will always be a light. It was one of the first stoplights in the United States, ironically. It has a plaque that says it was the first, but then I found one in Virginia that was a week or 2 earlier. So it was one of the first. back in the early 1900s. And so he donated a beautiful black ornamental post and stoplight to that area. He said, well, when I bring customers in, they all kind of laugh. You're a stoplight salesman in a city without stoplights. He said, I want one good stoplight to be able to show them what our product looks like. But no, he was fine because he said, there's lots of cities with lots of stoplights. What you're doing won't change my business.
Oh, that's good to know. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, right? Like historic downtown. When I first landed in the US, I was in Blacksburg, Virginia, and it said historic downtown, and then every town is a historic downtown. So, I guess the same applies to the first traffic light as well. I mean, a lot of
Blacksburg, you are Virginia Tech. The Blacksburg's beautiful.
yeah, it is beautiful. They actually did have 4 or 5 roundabouts, and things changed. I did a PhD in Virginia Tech, so I was there for about 5 years, and I did see a lot more roundabouts, especially in downtown area. So yeah, they are pretty much inspired by Carmel, and I have to point out that New York and Virginia are 2 states that have decided that roundabouts should be considered as an alternative before planning for a traffic light. So that's a
Yes.
fantastic development.
I was aware that New York had done that. I was not aware that Virginia had yet.
Yeah,
Roundabouts are now the default in Virginia.
I don't think they are default, but while planning, I think they should be given a serious consideration, is what I read.
They generally get extra consideration under federal highway trust fund funding if you're in a congestion mitigation air quality area, what's called CMAQ, because they do eliminate a lot of environmental damage, or they reduce a lot of environmental damage. And so that's gets extra points when you're competing for federal funding out of that highway trust fund.
Okay, that's really good. I think that's a really nice perk for choosing roundabouts. Um, so I was looking at some statistics, and Carmel is way above any other city when it comes to roundabout per capita, or even just roundabouts in general. What cities have reached out to you, or have you inspired to take up this measure to change it to roundabouts?
Oh, many cities have. Napa, California was putting one in off, I think it was 29 and First Street, and I helped on that one a bit. Sarasota, Florida reached out and I gave some talks. Several cities in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Drake University had me talking about it in Des Moines, Iowa. Mississauga, which is a large city next to Toronto, Canada. We think of it as a suburb, but it's over 1 million people in and of itself. So we've talked. A lot of cities have visited Carmel. A lot of suburban cities, Franklin, Tennessee, Sacramento sent a group in a number of years ago. We actually hosted in 2011. We hosted something called the International Roundabout Conference
In Carmel.
in Carmel.
Oh, wow.
About 200 people, most of whom were civil engineers that wanted to see, and we only had about 50 then, but it was still more than anybody else had anywhere in the country. So they could go out and observe and look at the various roundabouts. And we presented a book with the dimensions and angles of every roundabout we had to them. It was good economic development for us too. They came and stayed in our hotels and shopped in our stores and ate in our restaurants. So that was fun. This is somewhat humorous. I get a call I get an email actually a number of years ago, and the email gentleman identified himself as the president of the United Kingdom Roundabout Appreciation Society.
Okay.
And asked me to call him sometime. And so I did. And
we have all kinds of societies and associations. This is hilarious.
It gets better. It gets better. So I called him. It was about noon Eastern time in the US, which I knew would be about 6 o'clock in England. And he said, oh, perfect timing. We're having a meeting of the Roundabout Appreciation Society right now. And I heard noise in the background, and the noise seemed to me to sound like pub noise. And so I asked him, I said, do you meet in a pub? And he said, of course we do. We're British. And I said, well, how many people are in the Roundabout Appreciation Society? And he said, well, tonight there's 5 of us here. Sometimes we get up to 7. And so I was smiling to myself. And what he wanted to do, he said they put out a calendar every year of the months, January, February, March, and it's the roundabout calendar, and they have beautiful roundabouts from all over the world. And on the cover, they put the world's most beautiful roundabout. And he said, we've been reading about what you're doing. We'd like you to submit some photography, which we may use on the calendar. And so we sent some over, and they decided to put us on the cover, and we were the month of December as well. A beautiful roundabout. And then, of course, I get a call, how many calendars would you like to buy? And so we ended up buying about 10,000 calendars at $2 a calendar. Of course, we use them for economic development purposes. We were on the cover, so we handed them out. But I thought these guys had the most creative way ever to get beer money for their nightly meetings, the Roundabout Appreciation Society.
That is hilarious. They were probably just at a curry house right after a football game or at a pub. That's the climax is hilarious. Wow. I also realized that you are a part of Energy Independence and Climate Protection Task Force. Tell me more about the work that you do for them.
Well, it's a local advisory task force. I did it under President Obama's administration. I was asked to do it again under this administration. And it's local leaders, about 20 of us, 25 of us from around the country, county commissioners to governors to mayors, a few city council people, some tribal representatives that talk about how the federal government can be a better partner in terms of fighting climate change and improving air quality. And, I'm a Republican. Sometimes people say to me, why are you involved in climate change? Republicans haven't done much. And I point out the history to them. And well, first of all, it was Teddy Roosevelt, a Republican, who set up all of our national parks. It was Eisenhower who established the Arctic Reserve, a Republican. It was Nixon, a Republican, who signed the Clean Water Drinking Act, the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, and half a dozen more, and actually signed the bill that created the Environmental Protection Agency. It was Reagan who, with Margaret Thatcher, went to Montreal and signed and really led the signing of the Montreal Protocols to reduce ozone production so we didn't have an ozone hole in the Northern Hemisphere, which would have caused all sorts of cancers. Most people live in the Northern Hemisphere, not the Southern. We had a hole in the Southern Hemisphere. And it was senior President Bush, the father, that actually passed legislation, promoted and signed legislation that started to do data collection. So we'd actually have baselines for various data points that we needed to study the climate. So, and then I say, I have yet to meet a Republican or a Democrat who wants their family to drink dirty water or breathe dirty air. I said, this is a nonpartisan issue and should be. And so I'm pleased to work with the administration, trying to help them help cities better. So much, the average American still spends 2 hours a day in their automobile. That's because of bad city planning. That's because we've used single-use zoning. You have to drive so far to go places in so many cities. And so mayors and county commissioners and other local elected officials can do so much. When we thought the last president was going to withdraw us from the Paris Climate Agreement, mayors got together and said, we can meet the U.S. goals just by having the cities band together and make some small changes. Of course, we gave notice we're withdrawing, but never actually did it due to the administration change, which is a good thing. We needed to be with the rest of the world in that climate treaty. But it shows the power of good city design and good local leadership, because local leaders actually can make a huge difference when it comes to climate change.
Wow. Zoning is attributed to, the zoning and urban sprawl. Both are attributed to, longer times on the road, climate change, more carbon dioxide emissions. But Houston is one city that does not have any zoning laws, and it's not any better in Houston. So what do you see the future of these laws are? Should zoning laws be completely eliminated and more mixed use spaces be brought into cities?
No, cities need to be in charge of quality of building construction. We, they need to be in charge of where the curb cuts and driveway cuts are. All these things are very important to have a well-functioning, safe city. The difference is the type of zoning, I think, that I would promote versus other cities. I believe in what's called form-based zoning, where we're not so worried about use as we are, except it has to be mixed use, as we are about the form of the buildings and where they appear and the density of the buildings. So form-based building is almost always mixed use zoning. It has to do with heights. It has to do with walkability because of the design. It requires mixed use in a certain percentage. And so it's the type of zoning, not lack of zoning, that's going to save us.
Okay. You mentioned briefly that you are going to retire as of December 2023. You're not going to run again after such an
I'm not
illustrious.
sure I'll be retired, but I'm not going to care anymore. I have lots of other things I want to try.
Okay. Okay. So, yeah, that's one of the things that I want to touch upon before I end this podcast. You have brought economic development to the city of Carmel. You have redesigned the city. You have made it more walkable. You have increased green space. You have improved infrastructure. And I was looking at one of the videos of high school in Carmel, and it's awesome. There's no better way to put it.
Got to move
Uh,
here, Val.
I'm
You've
sorry.
got to move here.
If I get to work remote, then I definitely would. Um, and the last thing, you have promoted diversity in the city of Carmel, and people have been happy. It has been consistently ranked at one of the top cities in the US. My question to you is, you are ticking pretty much all the boxes that we need in America. Why are you not running for the president?
You're kind. I'm too old, number one, and it's a tough row. It's I
Is it
don't know.
because you're the Mr. Nice Guy?
Yeah, it we can be tough when we have to, when something the policy issue is important. We try never to personalize things, but we have had to be tough to make the sort of innovative changes we've made in Carmel. Your comments are very nice, thank you. But if you could be president without having to go through the election process, that'd be a wonderful thing.
it's
That's not our system. That's not our system. So it's just a long, grueling thing, and I think I can be helpful to other cities, and that's where the difference really lies. I have young students and older students sometimes come to see me, and they've been a bit starry-eyed about getting into politics, and of course, they all want to go to the U.S. Capitol building or go work at the White House. And I point out to them, I said, "Well, that's kind of fun. You get to work in some pretty beautiful buildings there." But if you really want to have an impact on people's lives, you'll have far more impact on an hourly basis working in local government in a city that you love than you ever will in Washington, D.C. You're a bit isolated from your constituents. You're working on broad nation policy issues, which are important, no question about it. But if you really want to have an impact on people's lives, everybody sees their government from their back porch in a way. What's this decision going to do to my property value? Is it going to make my commute to work better or worse? Is it going to be a great park for my kids to play in? Am I safe when I go out for a walk in my community? These are things that matter to people. Does my trash get picked up on time? Is there litter in the downtown area? Are there empty buildings, or is it a fun, vibrant place to go to? Or there are some cultural sports opportunities for my family. These are you can really have an impact on people's lives. You get involved in local government and do it well. And you could work very hard in Washington, D.C., and most people don't see a difference. Now that we don't need good people in making federal decisions. But as a Republican, one of the old-fashioned Republican ideas we had is that government closest to the people is the best. It's also the most effective because you can impact people's lives so much on a regular basis in local government. I had a woman call today, had an issue. We got it solved. We got the right department heads involved. It got solved in half an hour. Well, we made a difference in her life today. Not sure that happens every day in DC.
You sum it up perfectly. I think if you're with the local government, you touch more lives personally on a personal level than if you were in DC. You summed it up perfectly. I think what you're dreading is the campaign trail, right? I mean,
That's
the arduous 1.5 year or 1 year campaign trail, and you summed it up perfectly, where you said that if that was not the process, you might as well give it a shot.
we. Yeah, I remember watching the debate 4 years ago in the Republican primary, where the candidate that eventually won was shouting and screaming at people, and it was just so embarrassing to me. It was, as an American. And we went back afterwards, and I'd seen it once before. Um, I was too young to remember it as a kid. I was alive, but too young to remember it. But I'd seen it since. Went back and found on YouTube the Kennedy-Nixon debates, the first televised debates.
Yeah.
And it was such a respectful thing. They disagreed about quite a few issues, but every time they disagreed, both candidates would say to the other one, "Now, I respect my opponent's opinion. He wants the same thing we do. I just think there's a better way to accomplish it." And it was so refreshing and professional and gentlemanly, quite honestly. Thinking we need to get back to that. Civility in politics is tremendously important. The nature of a representative democracy is that we disagree with the best how to do things, and that's good. We get a better answer because we debate these things, but we don't come together as a country, and we don't get good results. We just scream at each other. We need to carefully consider. Remember one thing President Obama said once, it really impressed me, and it was, "I try to listen harder when somebody disagrees with me." And we all need to do that when we make political decisions. Listen hard, listen carefully. You may decide that you're right, and the person's points don't fly. Sometimes they do, though. Sometimes you change your mind, and that's why our country has been strong for a quarter of a millennium at this point. But we have to come together around these basic values, recognize it's okay to disagree, but not personalize it, and have respectful civil discussions. Simply because somebody doesn't agree with me doesn't mean they're a bad person. But that's so many times what I see happening in Washington today. You don't agree with my side, you're evil, you're corrupt. And that democracy is not going to work for long.
Yeah, that is something
If we continue down that road.
Yeah, that is something that I see increasingly, is that if someone has a different opinion, they don't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are a bad person, and we can all coexist even if we disagree on a thing or two.
You should disagree on policy issues. You get a better answer, but you don't have to be disagreeable during it. You can do it in a civil way.
Yeah. I was watching some of the tapes that you mentioned of President Nixon at the time, and you're right. I mean, there was so much more civility back in those days, and it'll be nice to get back to that point. This is a bit of a digression.
Everybody should go watch that 1960 or 1959 debate between Kennedy and Nixon. That's worth watching.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a bit of a digression, but has it happened that you are pretty close to one of these people who are running for the president, and they had a different opinion on stage, and they were a completely different person when they met you? You don't have to name them, but are they different people in person?
Yes, I have seen that. Sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't. Some of them are. I do know Mike Pence fairly well. He lives in Carmel. He was our governor while I was mayor, so we worked together very closely for 7 years. And what you see on stage is exactly what you see from Mike. There's no difference. He's a very religious guy. He's a bit dry, some days, and stiff, but that's the way he is. That's just the way he is. And I don't agree with him on some things. Other things I do, but he's very real in the sense that he's no different on stage than he is in person. And then there's other candidates I've met who are extremely different. It just depends on the person, I think.
Okay. Well, it was such a pleasure talking to you, Jim. I mean, what an honor. I mean, so much food for thought, not not for just public policy makers, but for people in general, that we can disagree, but at the same time we need to constantly evolve and listen to other sides. And who knows, someone else might have a better answer, and it's really important. I know you will not be the mayor of Carmel, Indiana after December, but I really wish and hope, and I know that you will continue to inspire many more cities to have that farsightedness in city planning and public policy. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I hope to meet you in person sometime soon.
Absolutely, we'll make that work. Thank you so much.
Goodbye.